Hi, welcome to the Fostex 4050 MIDI Synchronizer Autolocator Videotape Instruction Manual. This manual is designed to be a practical guide to the use of the product. It's not designed to be a technical workshop. To get the most use out of this video, we suggest you use it in conjunction with the printed manual that came with the unit. The 4050 is an extremely sophisticated product. As a matter of fact, some of the MIDI equipment on the market today, for example, the drum machines and sequencers, really can't take advantage of all the features that the 4050 offers. We suggest you check with the manufacturer of the respective products. First, we're going to set the dip switches here on the rear panel. Dip switches number 1 and 2 in combination select the SEMTI timecode generator output. A combination of these switches gives you 24, 25, 30, or drop frame. Right now it's set for 30 frames per second. Dip switch number 3 selects the communication bus baud rate. We have a serial data port on the 4050. Unless you have a personal computer hooked up to it, you do not need to worry about the setting of this baud rate. Switch number 4 is the TAC pulse selector switch. It should be set into the down position using Fostex recorders and the up position for other manufacturers' products. Switches number 5 and 6 select the modes of each recorder. Under Section 5.3 of the Owner's Manual, it gives you the proper dip switch settings depending on whether you're using the Fostex 80 and 20 or if you're using the B16, E2, or E22. Switch number 7 is not used at the present time. Ignore it. Switch number 8 establishes the length of time from output of the song position pointer to when the sound is actually heard. The down position is slow, the upper position is fast. The damping selector control is right next to the dip switches. You have settings from 0 to 9 that are possible. The damping will properly adjust the transport control so that it searches and locks into its position much more quickly. Set the number that allows the most smooth locating of the transport. It should be anywhere between positions 3 and 6 for the model B16 and number 1 or 2 for the models 80 and 20. Also, it is important to set the damping selector before you turn on the power. It does not make any difference whatsoever if you change it while the power is on. Now that the dip switches are set, we'll hook up the cables. First, the transport control cable. When hooking up the transport control cable, make certain that the projection here lines up with the notch at the receptacle. And don't force the cable. As you press it in, the locking ears will come up. And make sure the locking ears are in place. You'll then plug the other end of the cable into the back of your recorder. After the transport cables have been hooked up, you then need to connect your MIDI cables. You need to take the output from the 4050 autolocator, where it says MIDI out, to the input of your sequencer. It's very important to make certain that you have the clocks of the MIDI sequencer and your drum machine set to external. If you keep them on internal clock, you will not be able to change their tempo from the 4050. If you're going to store your synthesizer MIDI information in the 4050, then you would also need to bring that to the MIDI input. Or you can store it in your sequencer as you've probably done in the past. The play, locate, and punch in out jacks are duplicated from the back of your Fostex tape recorder. So your cables can simply go to the 4050 as opposed to going to your recorder. Above that we have metronome out, which is set from the front panel, the level for that output, and also level of the rehearsal beep, which we'll talk about later on. Over here is the tape dump switch. This should only be turned on when you're actually saving material onto tape or from tape. Next, we'll take the time code output, and we're going to record that on track 1 of our Fostex 8-track recorder. This is SEMTI time code out. Once we've recorded it, you'll need to take the output of that track of the recorder, and you're going to plug that in to the time code input jack. Before we can stripe the SEMTI time code, we need to turn on the 4050. If the word tape appears rather than numbers, it means that some bonzo has set the tape enable switch to enable. You need to turn off the 4050, turn the tape dump switch to disable, and then turn on the 4050. The 4050 has built-in battery backup. In other words, this will remember any pre-roll times that you store. It'll remember all the auto-locate points. It'll remember your automatic punch-ins and outs. If you want it to forget all those things, if you want to clear out the memory, except the defaults that the machine is originally programmed with, then you need to turn the unit off. And while you turn it on, you need to hold down the store button. Keep it down while you turn on the switch, and now the memories are completely clear. Before we go any farther, I feel it's important to mention what SEMTI timecode is all about. SEMTI stands for the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers, and they have a time reference, and that is measured in hours, minutes, seconds, frames. A frame is 1/30th of a second, and subframes, which are 1/100th of a frame. Within this SEMTI timecode standard, there are 4 references. One is 24 frames per second, which is typically for film, 25 frames per second, 30, which is for black and white video, and then what's called drop frame, which takes into account slight differences between black and white and color video and allows for an actual frame rate of 29.97 frames per second. So typically for color or broadcast, you're going to be using what's called drop frame. And sometimes people refer to 30 frames per second as simply non-drop instead of the 30 number. The SEMTI timecode generator that we have built into the 4050 is basically a little man inside with a watch. And the moment you hit the generator run button, he starts counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the output of that timecode goes onto one of the tracks of your tape recorder. To start the SEMTI timecode generator, all you need to do is press the generator run button. Pressing it once starts the timecode generator. Pressing it a second time stops it, and of course you can start it again. Right now the display is not showing the generator readout. In other words, you're not seeing SEMTI timecode. If you want to see the generator readout, you need to hit the recall button and gen. There's the SEMTI timecode readout. To stop it, hit the button. There may be a situation in which you've only recorded maybe 5 minutes of SEMTI code on a tape, and you've decided, gee, I'd really like to record the rest of the code on the tape. You can actually preset a start point for your SEMTI code generator. All you need to do is hit clear display, and let's say, for example, we want to start at 5 minutes, 1 second. Using this dot, you move over to here, indicating you could put in minutes. We'll put in 5. Move the dot again. We can now put in seconds. We'll put in 1. We hit store, and then generator. To make sure that point was actually stored in memory, we hit recall generator. And see, it says 5 minutes, 1 second. hit generator run, and it starts from that point. To record the SEMTI code onto the tape, make certain the level on track 8, the edge track where we're going to record the code, is set to between 0 and minus 3 dB. And hitting the generator run button, we then put the machine into record, and we suggest striping that entire track through the tape with SEMTI code, so you won't have to worry about going back and restriping later, and also prepares you for the entire session or sessions to come. If you wish to use the 4050 just as an autolocator, we strongly suggest you do what we recommend in the manual, and that is stripe one track from beginning to end on your audio machine with SEMTI code, and use SEMTI as your master timing or index reference for all your cue points. If you don't stripe SEMTI, or you can't because all your audio tracks are already taking up all the tracks on the tape, then you need to turn the display to relative. This tells the 4050 to only count tack pulses. The other alternative would be to go back to real time, stripe the first 15 or 20 seconds of your tape with SEMTI code, and every time you start a session, let the 4050 sample that SEMTI at the very beginning of the tape, and then it will have a reference to the tack pulses. If you use real time but do not have any SEMTI code anywhere on the tape, then you'll confuse the 4050 and your cue points will become very sloppy, if not completely useless. Now that you've striped some SEMTI time code on your audio machine, you then need to make sure you have the output of that code. On this we've been using track 8, and make sure that that is plugged into the input, the time code in, on the back of the 4050 autolocator. Otherwise, the 4050 won't be reading any code and will not be able to give you any timing information for your MIDI devices. Next, you need to set a MIDI start time. In other words, you need to say, I want all my MIDI devices to start at XXX. For example, let's set MIDI start time of 20 seconds. If you do not set this MIDI start time, your clocks will never start. We first hit clear display, move the decimal point over to seconds, punch in 20, hit store, and then hit start time. Now, to make this actually happen, you need to hit MIDI enable, and then make sure you have recorder enable on, and hit play. Do that again. Now when we get up to 20 seconds, the drum machine will start. There's a built-in metronome on the 4050. This will enable you to either hear or see the sound. You have your choice. To make the metronome happen, hit the sound button. Let's roll this back a bit. We've hit play. Now you'll hear a count off. We can do that again. Also notice that you have flashing lights. You can turn off the sound at any time. If you wish, you can set your measure and tempo information directly into the 4050 autolocator and not into your sequencer. If you want to set it into the 4050, all you need to do is first hit the tempo set button. Now it's showing that from measure 1, you're going to be in 4/4 time. If you want to change this, for example, you want the next section to be in 3/4 time, All you would need to do is hit Clear Display, hit 2, move the decimal point, put in a 3, hit the decimal point again, enter a 4, hit Store, and now it asks you for the next measure. There are two ways to set the total length of your song in measures. You can either enter the measure information individually, one step at a time, or you can touch the Measure Set button, which immediately brings up the first measure of the song. First measure, and it's in 4/4 time. To get to the last measure of the song, simply touch the plus button. This immediately takes the display to the very ending or last measure of your tune. This is showing measure 101 as the end of your song. This is the normal default value for the 40/50. In other words, if you do not enter any other information, it automatically assumes that your song will be 101 measures long. If you want to change this, while the dot is flashing, let's say we want to make the song 154 measures. You simply push in 1, 5, 4 and hit Store. Now your song will be 154 measures. If you want to check it, here's the beginning, hit plus, this is the last measure. You do not need to enter time or meter information. Make sure these read 0, otherwise an error message will come up. Once you've set your measure information, turn it off. Make sure you've hit the Store button before you turn off the measure set, or you'll get an error message. To set the tempo, right now the tempo is reading 100. This is the default value. Just by turning on the 40/50, the tempo is 100. If you want to have the tempo controlled by the autolocator, you need to make certain that your sequencer and drum machines are set to be controlled by the external clock, not by their internal clock. If you have them set for external clock, then we can control the tempo by means of the 40/50. And to change the tempo, let's make this 120. Hit Store. And we can have the tempo change for different measures if we wanted to. Now to check to see if it's working, at 20 seconds the drum machine should start. Now if you wanted to, you could also program different changes in tempo depending on the bar or measure or even beat. To do that, let's take tempo set, hit Clear Display, and let's say bar 3. Okay, 1. We're going to make this now 60 beats per minute. We'll store that. Now at bar 6, no, at bar 5, let's Clear Display, we'll go to 5. We'll make it back to 120. Hit Store. Turn off the tempo set. Let's rewind. And now you should hear the tempo change. Starting at 120, dropping to 60, going back to 120. The important thing to remember is that when you want to change the tempo, you need to clear the display, enter the new numbers, then hit Store. One great feature with the MIDI start time that can be set against the SMPTE timecode reference is that if you're working on soundtrack material, you typically have to have a cue at a very particular moment. For example, at 15 minutes 22 seconds, you may need to start a music cue. All you need to do to make sure you commit at that point is to set your MIDI start time at that particular point for your soundtrack work. It's actually possible for you to do your MIDI synchronization without having the tape recorder running. If you turn off Recorder Enable, you can use the built-in SMPTE timecode generator clock and these transport control buttons to control your clock for you. For example, right now the display shows 34 seconds. If I hit rewind, the tape recorder is not working, but the clock's running backwards. If I hit play, clock goes into play. And at 20 seconds, the drum machine will start. If I use the review button, it works just like it does on the tape recorder. You can even locate your positions. For example, let's see if we've got something stored in position 1. Now, nothing right now, so we'll enter 8 seconds. Store, and we'll enter that in position number 1. I can hit recall, position 1. If I hit locate, the clock now thinks I'm at position number 1, and it'll start from there. So if you want to rehearse your MIDI sequences, you do not need to have the tape recorder running at all times. To set cue or locate points, you first need to clear the display, set in your number. For example, we'll make this one 5 seconds. Move the decimal point to the seconds area, hit the number 5, hit store, and then assign it to a location on the keypad. We're going to assign cue 2. If you want to set another cue point, you can set up to 10 using the 0. You then hit clear again. We'll make this one 36 seconds. Hit store, and we're going to store that in cue 3. To recall or to locate to any of those points, you first need to hit the recall button, pick the cue. Let's pick number 2. That says 5 seconds, reminding you of your cue area, and then hit locate. And the machine will park to within 1/10 of a second of your cue point. We suggest you save cue positions number 8 and 9 for your automatic punch in and out cue points. To set an auto punch in and out, you do it in the same way as setting a locator cue point. You first clear the display. Let's have this punch in at 15 seconds. Enter 15, store, and then we're going to put it to number 8, which is auto record in. To set your auto record out, you repeat the basic steps. Hit clear display. We're going to have it punch out at 18 seconds. Hit store, and then hit 9 for auto record out. Now if we go into record mode or play to rehearse the take, you'll find that it'll punch in at 15 seconds and punch out at 18. If you want, you can keep rehearsing that function by simply using the auto return and auto play buttons that are built into the 4050. If you first hit clear display, and before changing the decimal point, you put in the number of the cue you want to begin with, then hit the dash. Notice how the display changes. Hit the cue you want to end with, which is number 9, our beginning and ending punch points. Hit store under auto return. Now the display goes back to normal. If you hit auto play, then whenever you go back to any cue point, it'll automatically go into play. If we hit auto return, it'll return to the beginning of the cue point. Let's roll the tape. Now it'll keep rehearsing from the punch in and out points. Until you tell it to stop. Now it'll just keep playing. Now, if you are going to rehearse it, you will probably want to have a pre-roll time set for rehearsal, so you can hear 5, 10 seconds, or even a longer segment of the song before you actually start punching in. Zone limits give you the ability to preset the beginning and the end of the tape. They let you tag it, and this can prevent you from running off the end of the reel in either fast forward, play, or rewind modes. It also prevents illegal search entries. For example, if you say go to 35 minutes, the machine will stop before it runs off the end of the reel, because typically you'll either have 22.5 or 30 minutes of tape maximum available at any one time. To set the zone limits, you first need to set them as cue points. To do that, you need to hit clear display. We'll set our beginning point to 25 seconds. Hit store, and we're going to store this in cue number 1. Let's hit clear. We'll set the zone limit end point at, let's say make it 38 seconds. Hit store, and we're going to store that in cue number 2. Now, the zone limits can also be used to prevent somebody from recording on your section of tape. To make the zone limits define, you need to first hit clear display. Before you move the dot, enter the first cue point, the beginning of the tape, which is cue number 1. Hit the dash. Enter the second cue point, or the ending point, which is cue number 2. Hit store, and then touch zone limit. Now you're back to the regular display. To turn on the zone limits, to make them effective, touch the zone limit button. Now if we hit play, at 38 seconds, it stops. You can also set your cue or locate points on the fly. That is, you can set them while the tape is in motion in either rewind, fast forward, or play modes. Not all autolocators enable you to do this. If you want to store the information on the fly, let's hit play. The display is rolling. As soon as there's a cue point you want to store, hit the store button. It freezes the display at that point and then gives you an opportunity to enter that into any location. We're going to enter this into cue number 4. Let's say there's yet another one you want to enter. Hit store. Enter that into cue 5. You ever want to go back to those? All you do is hit recall, the cue point you want recalled, and hit locate. You can also set your cue and locate points by the measure bar and beat. To do that, you first need to change the time-based indicator from real and relative to the measure bar and beat. Let's say we want to go to bar 24. To do that, we clear the display, enter 24, hit store. Let's store that in position number 3. To bring that back up, we can recall position number 3 and then hit locate. If you have a sequencer and a drum machine that can recognize the song pointers that are transmitted by the 4050 autolocator, then you'll be able to locate anywhere in the song you wish. If they cannot recognize these song pointers, then all they'll be able to recognize is the beginning and the end point of the tune. That means you'll always have to start from the beginning. You will not be able to start anywhere in the middle of the song. To find out if your product does recognize song pointers, don't call us. Check with the respective manufacturer of your drum machine or sequencer. The 4050 autolocator enables you to dump all your MIDI information to tape, as well as all your cue and locate information, pre-roll, MIDI time start, measure, and tempo information. So all these factors can be stored on tape. We suggest, if you have a spare track on your multi-track machine, to store this information on one of those spare tracks, and actually preferably at the head of the tape. We're going to record this on channel 1. To do that, first you need to turn the tape enable switch to tape. The display changes to indicate the word tape. You then need to set record track select enable. Now we're going to have it record on track number 1. Now if I touch button number 1 on the keypad, it says save. I then hit record and play. And the moment I hit store, the save process actually starts. It doesn't start until I hit store. After all the information's been dumped, save good comes up. Otherwise, it would indicate an error. To make certain you have the information on tape and there are no problems, it doesn't hurt to store it a second time, simply by hitting the store button again. Hit the number 1 button, save again, and then follow it with the store button. And once again, save good should appear after a few seconds. To verify that the information is on your tape, you then need to press number 3 for verify, hit play, hit store. After 10 seconds or so, the information's good. Verify good comes up. To load information in from your tape recorder to the 4050, you then need to press load, which is number 2, hit play on the recorder, and in all these procedures, you should actually be in play mode about 4 or 5 seconds before the data actually starts. We'll hit play, then touch store. After a few seconds, if the information is loaded properly and it's valid, it'll say load good. Load good. If you have a complete Fostex studio automation system, that is our 4050 MIDI synchronizer autolocator and the 4030 synchronizer and remote control with the 4035, there are 2 ways in which you can hook all this gear together. Number 1, we suggest that you use the 4050 simply as the MIDI to SEMPTI synchronizer. To do that, you need to give the 4050 a SEMPTI timecode feed as well as the 4030, and you do that by putting a Y adapter on the back of whichever channel of your tape recorder has the SEMPTI code. Plug that SEMPTI feed into the timecode input of the 4050 and disconnect the transport control cable. That means that the 4050 no longer can control the transport functions directly from the 4050. However, the 4035 remote controller has virtually all the same functions. You'll simply use this MIDI section to control all your MIDI clocks. The second method in which to use all the equipment is to keep the transport control hooked up to the 4050 and your tape recorder. And then when you wish to use the transport functions on the autolocator, you must take your 4035 and turn off lock enable. If you're in lock mode with the 4030 synchronizer and attempt to use one of the transport buttons on the 4050, the 4030 will override them because the lock mode or synchronization mode takes precedence over any of the 4050 transport functions, and you'll simply confuse everyone. Because the Fostex 4050 is software-based, we give you a method to determine which software version you have in your machine. All you need to do is hold down the recall button while you turn the power on. The last 2 digits, in this case 1.2, indicate which software version you have. You must send in your warranty card. This is the only means we have of notifying you when there are software updates available. In addition to that, any service or software updates can only be carried out by Fostex in Norwalk, California, not by local dealers.